Hey, welcome back to the shop. Major milestone here today. I'm finalizing the floor assembly. All the fab work is complete, as is the prep work, and I'm ready to start welding the new floor to marry up against the back half of the assembly, the new trunk and the Detroit Speed goodies previously installed. As always, I'll walk you through the process and share my thinking. Stick around to the end and see the final assembly roll back under the 67 one last time. Let's get started. You can see I removed the floor pan from the frame jig. You'll recall from my last video, we had a problem with the torque boxes. These plates form a spline that extend the frame rail through the torque box and close the gap between the front of the thinner gauge sheet metal of the floor pan to accept the Detroit Speed Subframe connector and have a solid, rigid surface to weld to, as opposed to just the thinner gauge sheet metal of the floor pan. This last piece of the puzzle closes the gap between the floor and the torque box. There's still a little play in here, and that's by design, because I was whittling that surface down so that this plate is in the proper location and doesn't create a hindrance for me to push the floor pan back far enough to be in its proper location. So there's just a little fine tweaking to be done to ensure that that fit properly. So I need to secure these plates and weld everything complete, but I'm going to tack them in place with the floor pan on so that I know these plates are in their proper location. Everything's been prepped with Steel-It and it's ready to be tacked. So I'll put the floor pan on and we'll come back. Okay, you can see here, everything is nice and flush. There's still a little flexibility. I'm going to raise that up a bit, tack it top corner, tack it here. Then I'll remove the floor pan and finish the welding, clean it up, both sides. And then I'm ready to secure not only the floor pan to the plate, fill in those remaining gaps, but then I can start welding the remainder of the floor pan. Plates are all welded, gaps filled, not the prettiest, but we're going to clean it up with the air file, coat it with Steel-It, and ready it for the floor pan. Cleanup's done, everything's prepped, looking nice and clean. I'm ready for the floor. Here's the underside of the floor pan. It's all prepped. All my holes, plug weld holes, have been drilled, strategically placed. Any surface that comes into contact with either the torque box or the frame rails has been stripped of the E-coat, and 2 wet coats of Steel-It have been applied direct to metal. Floor pan is ready to go. Time to lift the floor pan back on the frame jig one last time. Secure it down to the torque boxes, frame rails, and the back edge of the trunk pan. And the floor assembly will be married together once and for all. Okay, so how am I going to start welding this? We're here on the passenger side. You can see I have my floor pan clecoed down to the torque box, so I know everything is in the right location. I've clamped the torque box down to the floor because remember I had some slop. I could get my finger in between the torque box and the floor pan. So I'm going to focus on welding the floor pan tight and flush to the torque box first, and then work my way back. More importantly, tuck this corner down tight in the radius of the frame rail. Why do I start here and not pin it along the back? Because you can see I'm going to push down here. You see how that flexes? Okay, you wouldn't want to weld up here first and then leave this area floating, because then you'd have to stretch the floor to get it back down. So I'll start to weld and clamp, working my way up the radius to the back edge of the floor and trunk, both sides, and then last will be this seam along the trunk floor edge. Let's get started. I have the floor assembly flipped on its side on the rotisserie. I want to take you in for a closer look at the torque box. Everything's been welded from the top side, i.e. the floor pan down to the frame of the torque box. Nice penetration on all my welds. This is the corner that had all the slop. If you recall, I could get my finger in that gap. Now it's fitting to my liking. I have to plug weld now. I did take the cutoff wheel and cut a slit there just to hammer it down that last 1/8 of an inch. I'll weld up that corner, finish off the plug welds, and then I'm going to stitch every couple inches along the torque box and the floor and the frame to the floor pan. Just little stitch welds every couple inches just to finish it off and make everything rock solid. Okay, passenger side's done. All the plug welds dressed, gaps filled in around the spline plates, plug welds up the frame rail, and a few welds up along the trunk. Still have the driver's side to do. Don't forget, on this side there's still this heavy gauge brace that comes down, will get notched around the Detroit Speed subframe connector, tie in not only the subframe connector to that spline and the rest of the frame rail, but then cross brace it with this brace that extends to my enhanced rocker. And then I also have in this location the Detroit Speed roll bar. There's a gusseted plate here on the rocker that's adjacent to this that ties everything in crosswise and back and forth. And then likewise, reach over for it. The enhanced doubler plate braces this entire area and ties into the upper link pocket, which is over here. Upper link pocket. So all this metal is yet to go on to enhance this key structural area. Here's the passenger side torque box. I'll insert the before, and here you see the after. That slop is gone. Tight, rigid contact with the floor pan. Stitch weld and plug weld along that face. Tight along the frame rail. Excellent fit. Okay, everything's welded up. I went over some of the pinholes here after the first go around. You can see here the penetration from my welding underneath where I stitch weld the floor to the frame rail and the torque box to the floor. I've plug weld and then I stitched all along that back trunk area. Here, let's spin the rotisserie. Take you underneath. Okay, everything's been tacked. How much is too much welding, that is? Okay, just glorious fit everywhere. Very happy with it. Okay, both sides. Now I gotta spend some quality time with the grinder, clean this all up, and the floor assembly is in together. Okay, everything's been welded up and prepped. We're ready to go. See, nice and clean all the way up. Plug weld, and this seam all along the floor pan and the trunk has been welded. Both sides. I've even notched these braces around the spline plates, clecoed them down into their original reference location. Everything's looking good. Flip this around. Underside, all my stitch welding, everything's been cleaned up, tight around the torque boxes, both sides, lovely fit. You can see this inner seam from the floor and the trunk. I welded it both sides. Everything's cleaned up. A few spots to fill in. I'll address that before I finish stripping off all the E-coat. Why am I stripping off the E-coat? Because I have a Roberlo 2K primer that I'm going to be probably spraying onto this floor assembly before I weld it in, while I have easy access to it on the rotisserie. I'm still debating that or not, but I have everything on hand. So what's next? Well, I have to close out the cross members as part of the Detroit Speed Quadrolink installation, weld in the upper link pocket, and also locate the new heavy-duty spring perch tied into the spring perch doubler plate. There's the upper link pocket. Weld all that in. Then I get to finally install my Gear Effects 9-inch housing and locate the coilovers and get that all ready to go. I'm going to do that while the floor pan is on the rotisserie. I love having easy access to do all the welding. So that's the next step. I'm going to break the video here and come back very shortly and show you how everything goes back together. But in the meantime, reach out and comment. Love hearing from you, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.